on 938 Live. This is Talkback.
Now, you might have noticed the 3-hour PSI reading hit the unhealthy level of 102 last night at 8 p.m. Now, warnings of hazy conditions hitting Singapore sporadically in the coming days might have had you thinking about whether there's an end in sight to the smoke haze that periodically hits us due to forest fires burning in Indonesia. Indonesia's parliament has now given its unanimous approval to ratify the 2002 ASEAN Agreement on Transboundary Haze Pollution. It is the last of the 10 ASEAN countries to do so. Under this pact, nations are required to cooperate in developing and implementing measures that prevent, monitor and mitigate transboundary haze pollution. Among other measures, this means controlling sources of land and forest fires, developing monitoring systems and exchanging information, and they are also to respond promptly to requests for relevant information from other countries that are or may be affected by transboundary haze pollution. So how confident are you that Indonesia's ratification of the pact would mean fewer haze episodes for us here in Singapore and, of course, other neighbouring countries? Experts say that the move reflects Indonesia's readiness to address the issue, but challenges remain, including layers of bureaucracy, conflicts between local communities and plantation owners. All of this could scupper enforcement efforts. Joining us today to talk more about this, our Deputy Director and Fellow for ASEAN Business and Sustainability at the Singapore Institute of International Affairs, Chua. And joining us for the first half of our show is Director of the Worldwide Fund for Nature, or WWF Indonesia's Sumatra and Borneo program, Anwar Purwoto. Mr. Anwar, we mentioned layers of bureaucracy and conflicts between local communities and plantation owners as having the potential to scupper policies and enforcement efforts. Perhaps you could give us a better idea of the complexities on the ground here.
Yes, I think because of the limitation of the number of staff, then while the forest fire and land fire occur far from the government offices, that's why then for the government, I think a bit difficult to monitor the forest fire and land fire far from these offices. That's why then, to me, the easiest way is by putting the responsibility of tackling this forest fire directly into the companies, I think.
So giving them the responsibility, but how will that really help? I mean, if they don't exercise their responsibility responsibly, what would be the point?
By having satellite imagery when forest fire or land fire occur in a company area, then suddenly they have to be responsible. So by having that, we will extend the monitor, not only under the responsibility of the government, but monitoring and extinguishing the fire is directly under the responsibility of the companies.
Right. So if they don't do it, they get punished, right?
Yes.
The point is we have seen more being arrested for illegal burning in the past year. In fact, just this month, a Riau District Court sentenced a Malaysian plantation firm manager to 1 year in jail, fined him about 200,000 Singapore dollars for neglecting to prevent forest fires last year in his company's estate. The company was also fined quite a big amount, it seems 1.5 billion rupiah, and it was also ordered to pay 15 billion rupiah to take care of the environmental damage. But I understand that a lot of NGOs said that the sentences were too light.
Yes, knowing that the impact of this forest fire is huge, then I think increasing the punishment will give more, what you call it,
deterrent
awareness to the encourage to the companies.
When you say increasing the sentences, what are you envisaging? What types of sentences?
Sending to the jail and pay more of funds to the government.
Now, to what extent do you think the ratification would actually strengthen the government's ability to deal with the actual situation on the ground? I mean, you said, yes, make the companies responsible, so on and so forth. But layers of bureaucracy could prevent tougher sentences from being meted out as well, right?
Yes, you're right. There's good information that the government finally ratified the agreement. By having that kind of ratification, I think the government should increase their capacity to deal with this forest fire.
What are the obstacles standing in the way of the government doing this, though?
I think first because of, again, the limitation of the number of the staff. Then the second one is also the local community has a low awareness of protecting their environment. That's why then the government should two things that they have to do. The first one is increasing the capability, adding the staff and facilities. And the second one is increasing the awareness of local community.
Well, it's easy to say that these are the things the government should do, but what exactly is going to help the process along?
Yes, by recruiting the local community, I think, to be the part of the government staff, quote unquote, to monitor and mitigate the forest fire.
How might other ASEAN countries help, Mr. Anwar?
Yes, because by ratifying this agreement, meaning that other countries should also help to mitigate this forest fire.
In what way can they help?
Technical assistance, and also by sending maybe something like a facility or machine and others. Because for local community, why they doing slash and burn? Because the technology is not there. By increasing the technology owned by local community, I think it will reduce the forest fire.
I understand that the impending change in government, in fact, could pose some challenges. It's been reported that the budget for next year has already been fixed. So even if the new government wants to internally introduce new initiatives to combat the haze, it will have to wait till 2016. Is that true?
I'm not in the government structure, so I'm not quite sure how to change the government budget. But as far as I understand, in any time the government can change the budget.
Right. So in other words, they could if they wanted to.
Yes.
Now, in terms of local policies, local laws that are related to the transboundary haze problems, which areas do you think the Indonesian government needs to look at more closely?
At least three provinces close to the Malaysia and Singapore, Riau, Jambi, and South Sumatra, I think.
But what about the policies and laws?
Yeah, forest fire so far is under the responsibility of the central government. So the central government have to implement and enforce this regulation directly to provincial and district government.
Right. And those are the geographical areas you were talking about. Thank you very much for joining us today. That was Director of the Worldwide Fund for Nature, or WWF Indonesia's Sumatra and Borneo program, Anwar Purwoto. Thanks for joining us this morning. Let's speak now to Deputy Director and Fellow for ASEAN Business and Sustainability at the Singapore Institute of International Affairs, Chua. He joins us here as well. Now, Chinwei, I understand you're quite familiar with what's happening on the ground as well, and some of the concerns that Mr. Anwar brought up earlier, because you've been to Indonesia, you've talked to people there. Tell us about really the breadth of the problems that we're seeing locally that might scupper even the ratification of this Haze Pact, this ASEAN Haze Pact.
I think if we consider the so-called root causes of the fire and the haze, really it's about the line of responsibility. So if we look at so-called concession maps that are given by the local governments, there are different interpretations on the part of the government and also on the part of the companies. So as long as this remain as the situation, you will have a blurring of a responsibility as to who owns a particular piece of land, and therefore whose responsibility is it to put out those fires.
And of course, Mr. Anwar mentioned manpower shortages. He does say, though, that the central government needs to be the one to handle this, but could do with more help from the local communities because of manpower shortages within the bureaucracy. How can this be done, really? Is it a realistic expectation for this to come into being in the coming months?
I think the manpower factor is very critical and a real one. The last time when we spoke to some government officials, they had said that when they try to recruit people to invigilate fires, to invigilate land encroachment, they could not get people to be interested to take up those positions be it remote areas or limited opportunities, or sometimes just the nature of the work is discouraging. So this is where perhaps you need to think out of the box. Instead of relying purely on increase of manpower to look after vast plantations, we could think in terms of technology, for instance, remote sensing or remote monitoring, leveraging on satellite images, monitoring, and that can be an effective way for you to monitor large areas with precisions, and also to have data records as to what's happening on the ground.
But some would say more funding would be needed for that.
Certainly with more funding, more can be done, because even if you talk about technology, satellite images have different resolutions. The more expensive one can give you up to maybe 30 cm by 30 cm resolution, and that is a very kind of like pinpoint accuracy, which you can really see what's happening on the ground. Is there smoke, fire or not? So with more resources, definitely it will help in the situation.
Does Indonesia have the capacity to fund this on its own?
I believe so, but definitely if other countries like Norway can also help them in certain ways. For instance, Norway have pledged $1 billion to help them with deforestation, and part of the funds have been used to help them develop this system called the One Map. So it's an integrated national map system where they allow the different government agencies to overlay their maps. And this is a way for them to identify whether if the boundaries between the ministries are overlapping, and then how can they so-called have a harmonized map system that's updated.
Okay, so let's see whether all of this really comes into being. Will it really translate into action on the ground and result in clearer skies for us in Singapore? You can call in 669-11938. How confident are you that Indonesia's ratification of the ASEAN Agreement on Transboundary Haze Pollution will actually mean fewer haze episodes for us in Singapore and neighbouring countries? Stay with us on 938 Live. Thanks for joining us on Talkback on 938 Live. I'm Bharati Jagdish with Andre Achak. Now, you might have noticed the 3-hour PSI reading hit the unhealthy level of 102 last night at 8 p.m. And of course, there have been warnings of hazy conditions hitting Singapore sporadically in the coming days. And perhaps you've been thinking about whether there really is an end in sight to the smoke haze that periodically hits us due to those forest fires in Indonesia. How confident are you that Indonesia's ratification of the ASEAN Transboundary Haze Agreement will actually help, would actually mean fewer haze episodes for us in Singapore and other neighbouring countries? Now, Indonesia's parliament indeed has now given its unanimous approval to ratify the 2002 ASEAN Agreement on Transboundary Haze Pollution. Overall, will the ratification actually strengthen the government's ability to deal with the actual situation on the ground? Some of the obstacles that we have been talking about. There's decentralized control, not having much control and monitoring over plantation owners, conflicts between local communities and plantation owners, several layers of bureaucracy getting in the way as well. Deputy Director and Fellow for ASEAN Business and Sustainability at the Singapore Institute of International Affairs, Chua joins us today. Now, Chinwei, let's talk about that. I mean, overall, how optimistic are you that ratification would actually strengthen the government's ability to deal with all of those obstacles that we mentioned earlier?
I'm somewhat optimistic because with the ratification, there would be obligations under the agreement to cooperate, to share information. I think this would be a perfect opportunity and also used as a tool for Indonesia to realign some of their policies that may be at odds with each other.
And this can be rather complicated, though. So we mentioned all of the challenges on the ground. What type of strategy is needed here? How can Singapore help in that regard?
First of all, I think the challenges are very real. If you look at the current developments in, say, Kalimantan, there is a company that has been ruled by the Supreme Court because it is supposed to cease operation because it does not have a legal permit. But yet the company is operating business as usual. So you can see that...
What's wrong with the enforcement there?
Exactly. So you have the ruling from the court, but yet the enforcement at the end, at the ground level, might be limited, might be weak.
Do you know why this is happening? Why is it so weak?
Well, in some sense, the companies are operating within the local government's jurisdiction. So for the so-called any sentences to be carried out, we do need certain level of cooperation and a political will at the local level.
Mr. Anwar, who joined us earlier, Anwar Purwoto from the Worldwide Fund for Nature in Indonesia, said that the central government really needs to strengthen its hand here when it comes to controlling the local governments. But how feasible is that? We'll talk about that in just a moment, right after we speak with Chris, who joins us now on 669-11938. Hi, Chris.
Good morning. I have a suggestion to make, actually.
A suggestion. Okay, go ahead, Chris.
The Indonesian government ratification of the protocol, I think, sent a very strong message to the ground that the government is in full support of the resolution. But I think what is, that's necessary but not sufficient. I believe that one step forward is really to get the stakeholders, particularly the companies concerned, to be part of a group, a so-called a task force, to identify, instead of finger pointing, identify what are the measures that need to be done, and a concerted effort among all stakeholders concerned put their effort into trying to resolve this. To undertake these measures.
All right, thanks very much for that suggestion, Chris. Let's see how feasible that is. Chinwei, you've had some experience meeting with these players, these stakeholders. I'm reading into what Chris said, a form of self-regulation. Is that feasible?
I think self-regulation has been in place for the last 15 years, starting with the RSPO, and that is industry body, including the palm oil players and also trader banks and the other stakeholders. So stakeholder involvement is not new. There has been
but how successful has it been?
There has been some progress over the last 10 years. Perhaps about 10% of the so-called products are now certified, but more can be done.
Of course, and that is a small number. So, I don't know. A person, logically speaking, would say that why would it work? I mean, some of these companies are perpetrators themselves. Would they really be objective in terms of implementing rules and regulations on each other?
Yeah. So the first step is always to find out who is responsible for, say, causing fires on the ground. So 2 weeks ago, I was in Jakarta. I visited the REDD office. So they showed me their online fire monitoring system.
REDD is?
It's a government agency for reducing deforestation and emissions.
Mm-hmm.
So it is now an agency that's also tasked to look into the fire management and prevention. So I had the opportunity to see the online tracking system, which has very good satellite images and also has some information on concession ownerships. And they're able to pinpoint where the fires are and who might be responsible for those fires. So I think with the government taking the lead on this, the line of responsibility will become clearer. And once we know which companies are responsible, are involved, we can use different ways to encourage or to influence them to adopt better behavior on the ground.
And what ways would you say would be most successful?
Well, we always need to have a carrot and stick approach. On the stick side, Singapore has already introduced the Haze Bill. I think that in itself is a deterrent.
Of course, this is the Transboundary Haze Pollution Act, and under this act, of course, entities who cause or contribute to unhealthy levels of haze here can be fined up to $2 million, which a lot of people say is a very small amount.
Yes,
not enough of a deterrent either.
Yes. I mean, we have discussed this before. It's a small amount if you compare to, say, the mega profits taken in by some of these companies. But it has its deterrent effect, because if you are convicted or you are found to be guilty of causing haze to Singapore, and if you are based in Singapore, that definitely has implication for your continued operations within Singapore.
But also, when we spoke to Anwar Purwoto from WWF Indonesia earlier, he said that some of the sentences that have been meted out for causing this type of environmental damage have also not been enough of a deterrent. The jail terms are not long enough, according to NGOs in Indonesia. The fines are not large enough, considering that some of these offenders are repeat offenders. What sort of pressure can be exacted on Indonesia in order to increase those sentences? If any pressure can be exacted.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I'm not sure whether if we are going down the path of just focusing on keep on increasing the sentences on the companies, on individuals, because after all, the industry involved stretches over a large area, and there are millions of farmers involved in the industry. thousands over small-sized companies operating on the ground. And if you bring in one company to the jail, there'll be more to come. They'll take over the land to operate. So really, in the long run, I don't think it's about just having continuous conviction of companies, but really is to find a way for the whole industry to develop in such a way that there is productivity growth, there's better distribution of profits and gains from the big companies to the small ones to the farmers on the ground, and then also for the local governments to get more support from the central government, and then for the whole region as a whole, ASEAN, to tackle haze as a joint issue.
Okay, we'll talk more about what techniques can be used in that regard in just a moment. Let's speak with Benjamin first.
Hi, Ben. You're on the air.
Hello.
Yes, Ben, you're on the air.
Yeah. Have you noticed? I don't think that you all noticed that every time the Indonesian people, they are not happy with the government. You know, when they raise the petrol prices, they burn the forest. They always do that. So as long as the petrol price went up or the diesel or fuel price went up, they want to burn the forest. It's nothing to do with those plantation owners. Nothing to do with them.
Okay, that's Ben's opinion anyway. However, Chinwei, would you put that, I think that's a misconception, is it?
Yes, I mean, if we take a trip down to Kalimantan or some areas in Indonesia, you'll find that the plantations are very near to the homes of the people. Nobody would want to set their homes on fire deliberately.
Let's talk about that, because the local communities, and as you said, there's so many players to control here on the ground. What type of techniques, what type of approaches do you think would work here? Also, there are issues with land laws, very complex local community type problems.
And how much will education help, really?
Yeah. I think first, let's focus on who are the key actors on the ground that can make a difference to the situation. And for me, it's quite clear there are two. The first would be the private sector companies that are operating on the ground. The second would be the local governments. And the two really need to work close together and flag out what are some of the challenges that they face in terms of managing their plantations, and what are the ways that, say, they can work together with NGOs, the local community. At the end of the day, really is about shared prosperity, shared benefits, and the industry as a whole can develop in a healthy manner.
Okay, President-elect Joko Widodo has promised tough law enforcement. How confident are you that he will be able to deliver?
I'm somewhat confident based on his track record. He has risen up the ranks as mayor of Solo and then governor of Jakarta. He's known to be a grown-up person, always willing to walk the ground. So haze is an issue that comes from the ground, and I believe that with him keeping his eyes and ears closed, he can make a difference to the situation.
If there is no improvement in the situation, even after the ratification of the pact, what do you think can be done to exact even more pressure on Indonesia?
That is somewhat a very pessimistic...
worst case scenario,
Worst case scenario, yeah. I must say that I don't have a good answer to that, but I will place my hopes on the goodness of humanity, that we always do what's good for the environment, for the people, for ourselves. Yeah.
One last thing. We talked earlier about how Indonesia actually can fund a lot of these haze prevention efforts on its own. Why then should ASEAN countries like Singapore pour money into such efforts?
I think Indonesia sees Singapore as part of the problem and also as part of the solutions. I mean, if we look at the supply chain, we do have trader banks, companies that are benefiting from the resource sector in Indonesia. So they see Singapore as someone that has derived benefits. And they feel that haze is a joint problem, and therefore they see it as only natural that Singapore could consider ways to contribute towards some of these solutions.
Thank you very much for joining us this morning. Chua Chin-wei, Deputy Director and Fellow for ASEAN Business and Sustainability at the Singapore Institute of International Affairs. You, of course, can tell us how confident you are that Indonesia's ratification of the ASEAN Agreement on Transboundary Haze Pollution would mean fewer haze episodes for us in Singapore and, of course, other neighbouring countries. Talk to us on Facebook, Official 938 Live. Many thanks for your phone calls today.